So, Suleiman, do you want to start with some introductions to keep us on time, and then
Yeah,
as people joining, we will let them in. Why don't you start, and then I'll follow.
yeah, for sure. So, hi, my name is Suleiman, and
Keep
I'm
us
part
on
of the
time,
City
and
Science
then
lab at the
we'll
MIT.
let them in.
There we're collaborating with Hossein. Um, as you know, as you read about this workshop, we are actually looking at a few hypothetical kind of scenarios in terms of companies without offices. We'll get into the details for sure, but I have a background in architecture and computation, and basically I work with Kent Larson in the area of changing places, which is related to this theme of the workshop.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Hossein Rahnama. I am a professor of computer science at Ryerson University in Toronto. I'm also a research affiliate with MIT Media Lab. Has had the opportunity to work with Professor Larson over the past few years. I also spun off a company from our research lab a few years ago that is now growing. And one of the areas that we will be talking today about our workshop are parts of the observations that I have seen on how companies operate now these days, where we no longer have the opportunity to be co-located in a physical space. My research background is understanding context and relevance in large data sets and using that for engagement purposes. So a combination of human-computer interaction, data science, and artificial intelligence with a focus on building tools so non-data scientists and non-algorithmic experts can build useful tools so others can leverage them and come up with their use cases and ideas. Now, as part of this theme and the themes of workshops, we thought that we can think about companies and collaborative structures that are still functioning and innovating without being co-located. And that's why we refer to this as companies without offices. We want to keep the workshop pretty interactive and fluid. So we prepared some material so we can kind of build some context, but would love to keep it very conversational, very interactive, and would love to hear from all of you. So I'll start by giving you a bit of a background. The focus we have is that now that all of us are remote, can we actually think about virtual proximity and relevance and similarities when we no longer have those, as Professor Sandy Penland says, those honest signals, those social physics. And if you're missing that now because we are looking at each other using these two-dimensional tiles, what are going to be the paradigms that we can think of to really build that connection and that bonding again? And as we no longer looking at each other and who's at their desk and who's not, so we no longer have those input biases, how can we actually build research labs and organizations and non-for-profits and startups that are more outcome oriented? Because you may agree with me, the old way of looking at work that everyone show up at the office from 9 to 5 and that's your cubicle, and I kind of use that as a bias to figure out whether you're doing your work, that will not, in my point of view, that's not going to come back again. So we need to think about new ways of looking at productivity, look at zoning, look at spatial utilization. And those are the things that in a very fluid way we want to talk about today as part of our lecture. As you know, City Science is a global initiative. I have the opportunity to run the Toronto hub. This is a fun view from Ryerson University, which is a very urban university, not too dissimilar to MIT. And the City Science Lab is actually located here. So hopefully one day, if next year or the year after, we can host a workshop in Toronto, hopefully a lot of you will be able to visit us. Now, let's look at what has changed. This is our lab at a very urban area of Toronto about, I should say, about a year ago. We had open desks. People were coming together in defined, discrete time frames. We could walk around. We had these ambient social signals that were going on. We could collaborate. We could meet. But that has changed. I think a lot of you may agree with me. In the past, we used to get a location, whether it was a tower or a physical office, and we co-located everyone. And we kind of had an idea and some level of comfort that, hey, on this level, I have my engineering team. And on the other level, I have my marketing team and my research team. Even I can come up with some interesting things to do activity recognition and timestamps and other to kind of get an idea of productivity. So location helped a lot. But that very same office from, let's say, a CEO's perspective or a leader of business is going to look like this. This is my new office now, right? They are all, even if I think about location as a city in which I can hire locally for my business, this is how I can think about my office now. So I now need to have different ways to connect people to each other, to measure productivity, to incentivize people to collaborate. So we require a different way of thinking about how we build these innovative, scalable organizations. We are going from, in our view, from centrality in physical space to decentralization. Even if you look at Silicon Valley, where you had these super beautiful offices that were used as an incentives to bring people in, now, instead of having a central hub, they are building smaller hubs around the Bay Area. So people who live in San Jose, they can go to the San Jose hub. People who are living in even Monterey, they can go somewhere else. So again, they are thinking about decentralization, not just on the space, but on how they connect people, not just based on function or skill sets, but based on where they live. Now, what we wanted to do today with Suleiman is this. If we want to build a framework together, we want to act as a startup today and we say, okay, we want to design the company of the future. We thought that we can look at a number of pillars that we can look at and say, hey, if we address them, can that be a framework for scale for the new norm in companies? And these are the things that Suleiman and I taught about, but we now want to open it up to you as part of a case study to see what your thoughts are around each pillar that we are talking about here. Let me see if I need to admit anyone. No, I think we're good. So I quickly highlight them. It could be personal things. I have the both the challenges and the opportunities to hire a lot of young engineers for our startups, right? The way I persuade them, the way I incentivize them, can no longer do that with a super cool office with bevy machines and cool chairs. That's gone. I need new incentives and new metrics so they persuades them personally. We are also seeing that because collaboration is becoming very discrete and disjointed. So you say from 3 to 4, come on a Zoom call and we are going to discuss this, and we all disappear. You miss those ambient social signals and physics that we used to have as an office. So the question for us as a group is, well, how are we going to replace that, right? What is this new way of connecting people in a calm and ambient way so collaboration can increase? Suleiman has done a lot of great work when it comes to things such as spatial analysis, zoning. So I will pass it on to him to talk about the third pillar a little bit more about what he has seen to date. Suleiman, to you.
So yeah, and when it comes to the new norm of like thinking about working from home and thinking about working remotely at some time, we realize that at some point we need to meet, and these type of meetings and collaboration can happen physically, but in a different way. So we're thinking about from a spatial point of view, centrality versus decentrality, Um, you go to your office for certain moments for interaction and collaboration. It is still essential when it comes to the relationship between people and mentorship, to be, especially when you're like new to the organization, um, to understand like the personalities and the relationships more or less. The other thing, these kind of like challenges becomes a kind of a new questions for zoning and regulations, especially when it comes to these urban spaces like business districts, whereby historically it was operated from a certain time of the day during working hours. So if you go on the weekends, it's different. It's like closed. So we're thinking that if those spaces are changing, what does that mean in terms of like utilizing them for different purposes, and vice versa at home? What does that mean to bring businesses back to home? Um, is it allowed by zoning regulations, especially with the different kind of entities and different kind of zones and different locations around the world? And the other thing that also I think we like to actually ask you guys is, there's still a connection between the built environment and people in the spaces. Obviously, similar to what Hussein was talking about, it is essential sometimes to meet in person. It is essential to see the relationship and collaborate with teams. So. So this brings us to new types of metrics that we need to assess in terms of what's public, what's private, what's ownership when it comes to your own space, and at the same thing for the offices itself.
Right. Yeah, so we actually designed some fun case studies for you that we are going to kind of go through the study and see how we can map these elements together. The other thing that becomes an issue these days is having access to the data and also sharing the data. So in the past, there was some level of comfort that if an employee is touching sensitive data, it's within the confine of a secure network, there is proper encryption, there is proper access. Now companies really don't have a lot of control in figuring out through what medium data or sensitive data assets can be accessed. So we are also going to discuss that. And one of the fun things we want to talk about today is the definition of productivity. Lots of research, lots of literature around defining productivity. But one thing that we want to discuss today is that should we look at productivity in a more holistic way? In the old days, you say productivity is kind of measured between input and output, right? But now, can we say, well, now that you're working from home and your employer knows that you also need to handle your young children and commute and everything, maybe we can actually define a multidimensional way to define productivity so the company can actually come and reward you in terms of how you handle all of these elements at the same time. So it's no longer going to be a linear function. Now, we have mapped these, we will share the deck with you, but we thought as a framework, we can break down the framework for building a new company in which location and office does not have centrality anymore, and we can discuss this framework across these 6 areas. What are you going to do to really persuade the employee? How are you going to connect employees together so that sense of collaboration and cross pollination is there? How are you going to generate data in a privacy preserving manner so that the company can understand productivity, but it does not act as a big brother? And also, how do you comfortably share sensitive data with your employees that are global? We are going to talk about um, both spatial and zoning elements of space. We have all seen this. So think about this, that if I use my home for working, this is a residential zoning or a residential use. What's going to happen to tax? What's going to happen to zoning? Is my company going to help me with my mortgage or rent because I'm using my home for work? Or that's too complicated, we don't even want to go there. And then we want to discuss productivity together. Now, as we build some context to start our case studies, I want you to think about things that have not changed and things that have changed. And how are we going to optimize against this? If we purely talk about a classic for-profit company, so there are different companies, there are great things we do in research, but think about the entity we are going to consider is, think about it as a company, as a startup, as who has like financial mandates and goals. No investor has come to a company and said, you can actually perform less. It's okay. The expectations are still very high. You got to perform. The market dynamics are there. The performance expectations are there. So that has not changed. The regulation is more or less the same. Tax regimes are more or less the same. Zoning and commercial real estate protocols are more or less the same. So those, we cannot change them. We can discuss as part of this workshop that what type of a suggestion we have for them to change, but also let's look at the things that have significantly changed. Because we no longer have access to a physical space and co-location, we are using a lot of that uniformity of culture, right? You tend to break down people into groups or desks or tables and floors, and somehow that contributed to a level of theming or culture. We don't have that anymore. We used to have these collaborative settings, and some people call it the water cooler moments. You come and chat, you go have coffee, you go eat lunch together. That's gone. So the collaborative settings have completely changed. We no longer have those ambient social signals and information flow across offices. And more importantly, there are very, very, very few management teams around the world that actually know how to handle these types of organizations. There has been one view in the past that yes, everyone can be remote, and one view was everyone should come to the office. How are we going to come up with a hybrid model that is complementary? And of course, we have limited peer learning because people don't co-locate, people don't sit beside each other. So those are, Suleiman, do you want to add anything to that as part of the things as we are building some context for our case study?
Well, I think that you covered them perfectly. No.
Perfect. Yeah. So one thing we are going to discuss is this. This is our case study. It's actually a real case study. The picture that you see on the left is a tech office in Toronto with 150 staff members, and each part of the office was allocated to a group of people: engineering, core engineering, R&D, marketing, business, HR. This is also a picture of that very same group in June. They are distributed across the city of Toronto. Now, as a CEO of that company, I used to have some level of control and confidence. I could go left. I could talk to the head of marketing. I could get a sense of performance. I could go to the other area. So I could build context and understanding of my company by coming into a physical space. How am I going to do that now? Am I going to connect a sensor to all my employees and track all their activities so that I become comfortable? No, we can't do that. So how are we going to build a trust protocol that we are going to trust everyone, and whatever they suggest, I can input it in a formula and say I'm productive or not? Or there are other elements that we can discuss. So let me pause here, see if everyone is okay with the context of our case study. And then we prepared some questions for you that we can go through it together. And by answering those at the end of the workshop, hopefully we will contribute to the design of this framework. So I'll pause. Any questions, any comments? Okay, so hopefully that's a good thing. Let's see if we need to.
So yeah,
Yeah.
just one thing when it comes to like looking at this diagram, um, what would be interesting to see and to know that if we combine the space with time, we understand that this office, hypothetically speaking, in February, it was operated from 9 to 5.
Mhm.
Usually, everyone is working at the same time. Everything is structured. There's no like basically more or less like there's a synergy between the times of each one there. When it comes to a distributed model, are we talking about a change in time and change in location, which is means a change in a time zone? And with the hybrid model that also is connected with people and their dependencies, we see that even what's happening outside is actually impacting the employees. So we're talking about maybe the schooling system and the other systems that actually affect the times of each one of the uh, each person in the office, which means that the synergy it may not be there anymore in terms of time. Um, but we can maybe go through the second slide and maybe start to think about what are as what Hussein was saying. What is the new framework in terms of how we will be looking at the spatial the zoning the regulations, what uh, what can we do in terms of like telling the authorities the new demand, like for example, buildings may have at some point like 50 people of occupants, and then maybe at other points 500 people, depending on the time of the day. And then how does this kind of framework, what are the kind of complexity that this kind of like notion bring to existing kind of like strategies and regulations? Other thing about connections with people, collaboration, productivity. There's a lot of social and behavioral environmental behavior studies talking about what's the relationship between the layout and the architecture and the building in terms of um, encouraging collaboration or not. And then the main idea that we all know that most of the collaboration and innovation happens outside your workstation. When you actually go to the kitchenette and when you go to print something, you actually meet somebody um, by coincidence, and this is where the sparks happen. Similar to like what conferences and the chance of meeting different people at different locations. And the other thing that we would like to discuss also by answering the following questions is what are the aims for the different stakeholders? When we're talking about an adaptive space, adaptive building, adaptive zone, and we will have different um, stakeholders like the company, the building operator, and the regulator. How the same kind of thing from a different perspective can it be discussed?
Yeah,
And
perfect.
then
So let's actually start with some fun questions. I'll give you a case study. Um, let's say, as a CEO of a company that is responsible for maintaining this, I am spending, I use a North American standard. Just for the sake of simplicity, let's say I am paying $100,000 per month to lease this space for my employees. And I agree with my board and I agree with the commercial landlord that, you know what, I'm no longer going to pay for this office. I'm going to abandon the office. So I have $100,000 to spend. And what I want to do, I want to bring that $100,000 and distribute it across all my employees and say per month, I'm going to give you a stipend and go and build the coolest possible home office, buy the things that you want, augment your working environment. That's something that I heard from a number of peers in the industry, which is interesting. But one thing we want to discuss is that if we do that, um, do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? What do you think will go right? Do you think it's going to contribute to productivity? Do you think it's going to actually, over time, it's going to reduce productivity? What are the risks? And then we are going to fill this table together. These are the elements that Suleiman and I talked about. So for each question, I will help you to fill up the table to figure out, as we are answering these questions, if we can come up with that overall framework that we have in mind. So the question for you is, I want to give a stipend of, let's say, $2,000 to all my employees per month. And I say, go and make sure that your home office is perfect for work. You can buy the monitors, you can buy laptops, you can augment it with whatever you want. What are the things that
You
I
can
need?
even use it for your rental or mortgage
That's the,
payment.
that's the second question. So let's not go there yet. So that's the second question. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So would love to kind of hear from you. I did not create a Google. I mean, we could not do polling for this because we need some answer. I also didn't want to create an open Google Doc because I did not have control over its security. But if you can help me, feel free to speak. Feel free to put your suggestions on a chat, and we will monitor it, and I will type it for you here. Any brave volunteer want to start first?
I can start.
Please.
Of course.
Sotirios. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for the very illuminating uh, first part that you explained everything, introduction to the theme. Um, I think um, I think one of the things, well, regarding to your question, I think it's a very nice idea to distribute funding, um, but I still believe there needs to be a core. Psychologically, I believe that to go to, like, in your list, there was like the 4 point was like the sense of belonging, the sense of community, the sense of belonging to a group of people. And through my experience, after those like 6-7 months that we are living under the coronavirus, quarantine of some kind, I think it makes sense to somehow give some space for this to exist somehow, like even for psychological reasons. I don't believe that for productive reasons is necessary, but the idea that people can feel that somehow they can go into a space and maybe there is some kind of rotation for those people who want to go and work in the specific location. That not necessarily, it doesn't need to be like the center of the company. You see what I mean? I mean, it still can be a distribution of, the company in different locations. However, the idea of having a location, I think it's important. And from that point, I think everything that builds up this notion of trust and this notion of belonging, this notion that the company cares for me and I'm going to care for the company. I'm going to care for the people who care for me. I think that's very important too. So in that sense, totally agree with the idea that, you can distribute some of this capital to the people that they use their own home for work.
That's a very good point. So if Suleiman helped me to write some notes here. So basically you're saying it may not be a bad idea, but you need to look at it a bit holistically because culture matters. You still need to have a place for people to come together. This place may not be the old space that everyone has a cubicle and a workstation, but it's a place to meet, to collaborate, to share. And then people can choose whether they want to stay to do private work or they want to go home. So I think that's a great thing that still we are looking for a hybrid way. People need to feel comfortable that there is a place. So you're saying there is this psychological connection, this bonding when you work for a company, you actually want to feel that you can go somewhere, which I think is a very good point that you mentioned. The question I have is, if a company does this, right? Do you think it's because let's think about, I'm going to shorten the subset of companies that we are working with. Think about competitive companies in the knowledge economy. So that's kind of how I created it. They are competing, especially they are competing for talent, especially they are competing for talent in very large urban areas. If you are a tech startup in Boston, right, you are truly competing for talent against a lot of entities. So if we use this as an incentive to say, hey, come and work for me, and in addition to your base salary, I'm going to create a stipend for you so that you can have an augmented home office. I think some people see that positively, but let's talk about what can go wrong. What are we missing here? Is it going to create a reverse effect or culture? Is it create governance issues? Is it going to create tax issues? Is it going to complicate things? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Hi.
Hi.
I actually work in a company and we're doing something similar to this.
Yeah.
So I think I can talk a little bit from experience. But I think some of the things that can go wrong is first that we cannot consider that all employees are in the same situation. So right now, when defining the stipend, we're dealing with issues like I don't even have space at home to have a home office.
Yeah.
So what happens to people that were depending on the office as the physical place where they could go to work? Mm-hmm. And also there's also the other hand, like the other side of the argument, where there are people that told us, please don't give the money to me because I have everything I need. So sometimes you encounter where the money doesn't necessarily need to be like divided equally, but it's more of a responsibility for the company to create equality for every employee. And also another issue I think is that so as we went remote and as we're doing this, I think that you were considering a specific amount of money for the lease you were mentioning. Yeah. But as you keep growing remotely, does that mean that you're gonna give less and less money as you become more and more employees?
Yeah.
So you cannot tell an employee like, yeah, I'm gonna give you a stipend of $1,000, but then as we grow, then it's gonna go down to 500. Yeah. So it needs to be sustainable financially for the company as well.
I love that feedback. That's a great feedback. Now let me connect that feedback to a data question. So I just wear an engineering hat and I say, that's an interesting problem. I'm going to connect a bunch of sensors to you. I'm going to connect a bunch of sensors to your desk, and I'm going to do activity recognitions to see if you're working or not, or what time. And I'm going to get all that data and model that data. Okay. What's going to happen then? I'm assuming the first feedback you say, hold on a moment. The boundary between my personal life and my work life is already too thin, and you're going to making it worse. So if we want to use data in that situation, if we want to use technology in that situation, Kent's group has built some amazing sensors. I think some of you may have seen it, the termites and all that. We can leverage all of those, but what do we need to consider if we want to bring technology to this discussion, addressing the concerns that Anna shared with us? Anyone?
I mean, spatial distance between other people in the house, proximity.
Okay. But will you be comfortable to have sensors or generally activity recognition in your house for the purpose of reporting work activities?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
And I believe that you should trust people. And if they deliver, it doesn't matter. You know, you don't want to really keep them on the clock to see if they work like 8 hours or 7.5 or like 5.5. The important is that they deliver. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that don't consider only, like, I think a company can benefit from the fact that if you have like a distributed workforce, you can you can engage people from other countries as well, and from places where they don't need to have a visa, they don't need to have like a work permit, they can just work from anywhere, and you can actually benefit even from the job market difference, right? So like, let's say you can get like really good programmers in some place where the market is not so expensive, so the company can benefit from top talent that is not very highly paid in other countries.
I love that feedback. So let me use that as a gateway. So let's now, I think what Sotirios, am I pronouncing your name right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, great. My Greek is becoming better. So I want to use this as a segue to what our friend mentioned. One thing I observed as a CEO of a tech startup is that in the past, my number one focus was to hire talent in 3 core urban areas in Northeast: Toronto, Boston, New York. That was a binary filter for me, right? Is the first thing I looked at the resume was, is the person is one of the hubs that I operate. Within the past 6 months, that filter is completely gone. I can now, the only impediment that I have between me and a new employee is time difference. And as long as the person is, let's say, is in Americas or even in the Western part of Europe, I can really handle that workforce very well, right? So I can now have access to a much broader talent pool as a knowledge-based company. But think about this. How many of us have seen employment law, regulation? For those of you in the US, you want to bring someone to the US, you have green card issues and all that. Is that going to disappear, right? What are going to be, so if I am a Delaware company, if I'm a US based company, a Canadian company, a Mexican company, if this becomes a trend that people can go and hire from wherever else they want, but still they need to commit to pensions and all that, do we need to have a major change in terms of how we look at public policy and employment laws? Because, hey, the person can be anywhere. So let's use that as a segue, bring it back to our case study and see what are the things, if we want to go to a government and have a hearing, what would be our recommendation to these to these people on what do they need to look at, because the way we hire is very different than 6-7 months ago. Any comments there?
I think we need to consider like the responsibilities both for the company and for the individual, because when you're hiring in a different country, what often happens is that you hire them as contractors, but then that puts out like an additional pressure for new employees, because now they're liable for their own taxes, for their own like bank accounts, like they need to hire accountants, etc. A lot of things that usually they wouldn't worry about, and you would take care of them. So I think in the long run, it can be like it can demotivate people, because it can be a burden for them.
That's a very good point. So I think what we are coming up with here is that, perfect, for a knowledge-based company, the talent pool has increased, but oh God, you may not actually have a very motivated workforce over time because you're creating all of these legal complications for them. Is that a good assumption?
Yeah, and then there are worries where how do you draft contracts, because then people are liable. Like you need to be very specific where you're just like lending your services, but you're not an employee. And if anything happens, you as an individual, as an employee, you're liable to your country. So then you're kind of on your own. And I think if we're talking about this like knowledge economy and high-tech companies, There are a lot of people that aren't used to that. So they're used to a workplace where they have insurance, where someone does their taxes. So why would they go to your company when now if anything happens, the company won't answer for you? It's you against the law of your country.
Exactly.
And on the other note, when
much
it comes
more
to
vulnerable position for an employee.
Sorry, say it again, Marcus. I couldn't catch.
Much more vulnerable position in general from a civic responsibility perspective.
Absolutely.
The status of contractor versus employee.
Yep. And the question is that if we are aware of that, and if executives and companies are becoming aware of that, what is the new public policy model that we need to look at that is addressing both? I don't think we have that, because and that could be one of the takeaways. Suleiman, if you can help writing that here, that could be an interesting one to review.
But I also think it can become very predatorial in the non-developed world. So in countries where labor laws are not established and employee, salaries are much lower, person X who is working in Egypt is earning a third to a fourth of what that same person would be earning here. And that can create another kind of very big social dynamic globally.
Exactly.
Which is a globalization, challenge.
So are you suggesting that there may need to be a public policy in which going back to your example, if a US company wants to hire someone in Egypt, they have to hire them based on US law and pay them like a US employee?
So that would be ideal, but that's not what's happening, right? Because the status of contractor is what really, we're outsourcing this service. That seems very benign, but it really has a much bigger implication.
Yeah, great.
At many levels.
These are great feedback, and as we are collecting them, of course, we will clean it up and then we will share the outcome with everyone, perhaps by the end of the week. But I love the feedback.
Can I mention one more thing, and then I'll turn my mic to mute back?
No, please go ahead, Mark.
But one of the fears of things going wrong is kind of siloed development. As people retreat into their individual office, a lot of the interactions that we value in lab spaces or in high are much more cumbersome through technologies.
Yeah.
And, quantifying the productivity to cumbersome is going to be a very interesting study moving forward.
Yep. Very good feedback. Thank you.
One of the other thing that I think maybe we can do a comparison here is eventually outsourcing a few of the work elsewhere. I mean, like I've been working for companies in Australia, and usually we were outsourcing a lot of CAD drawings and the like to different areas, such as, for example, Singapore and Indonesia. But what we realized at the time is the local law it prevented us basically to have somebody with the knowledge that actually is based on the local kind of metrics and local regulations. So we ended up having consultants from New Zealand with the proximity to Australia, which is like similar kind of regulations, which in a way created a different types of clusters between of the relationships of countries and regulations and what's known, especially if the type of the work is not like basically knowledge based. Maybe it's not IT or database kind of, like it's not generic, but it's more specific. So I think maybe we can, with the context of our workshop, we saying in the outset that we're having knowledge-based kind of framework, but that can be also connected with people working for us, especially like lawyers and the like.
Yeah. Perfect.
So should we move to the next?
Yes, let's go to the second question now. And again, please keep this interactive. We want to hear a lot of suggestions and opinions. So we don't want to kind of dictate the guideline, but we'd always love to hear from you. So let's go to the second question. We will add this. We will add this and compile this and send it to you. So here is we are going to make it a little bit more complicated because we want to see if we want to build a multilateral framework for government to be involved, for banks to be involved to manage transactions between employers and employees, and also create an incentive. We want to kind of, following question one, we want to make it a little bit more complicated, get your opinion, and then we will move to a very different question. So let's say we implement a flavor of what we discussed in question one. The company is paying for the support of the employees so they can have an efficient working environment at home. Now, let's think about a profile of a young professional working for a knowledge-based economy company saying, okay, I have rent, this is my commitment per month, or I have a mortgage payment. I have committed to, let's say, a 25-year-old mortgage payment, and company, can you cover up to 30% of my rent or mortgage in exchange of my overperformance? So would that work? And is that too complicated, right? Is that going to attract kind of more employees because, hey, look at this company, not even they pay me salary, but they help me also to cover my rent or my mortgage because I use my home for work purposes? Or you're like, oh my God, this is really tough, and let's not even go there. And what are the things that we can look at there? Zoning become an issue, right? What are the protocols that we need to develop? We mentioned some of them. So there is a trust that if I do that for you, you contribute to performance. And yeah, so how do we build that framework? So any questions there? Or any comments you want to add to that? It's not too dissimilar to the first question, but it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, also I would add that liabilities can be also an issue when it comes to like when you're working at the office, you're covered by insurance. So when it comes to working from home, how can we look at the insurance kind of like issue at the same time?
Yeah.
So yeah, any thoughts about this?
I mean, I would hope that companies working across borders would set standards for the quality of life of their employees as a productivity.
Yeah.
And that is something that we should all talk about, you know, whether that's healthcare, education, access to R&R, you know, kind of things. And I think that without that, it is dangerous to allow companies to move across borders without having the right safeguards in place.
Yeah.
And that's a daunting challenge.
Yeah. I love that feedback. Let me actually tell you a real story about 2 weeks ago that happened to me. So one of our graduate students who work with us came to me and said, this is the first time that I'm sharing all of my to-do lists with you. Before COVID, I like most of us, we had a number of to-do lists. We categorized them. This is what I got to do for school. This is what I got to do for work. This is got to do for my personal life. This is what I got to do for my parents. She said, for the first time, I am comfortable sharing not just my work to do, but all of it. So you understand all the things that I'm juggling at the same time. And that created this question that if you want to become a next generation company or a next generation research lab, can you actually reward and incentivize your employees around their holistic productivity, not just based on input and output? So I just wanted to use that real example with you. And that one of the key things that may come from our workshop is that there may be a new formula for productivity. And then at the end of this, I'll share an example with you that is not just about the outcome of work, but your overall life. Any feedback on that?
I mean, I'm just thinking that it's inevitable that companies create their own crowd, let's say. Like right now, you know, if you work for Google, for instance, you feel like a little bit higher than everybody else, but still it's let's say, well, I'm saying that as an example, like if you are like a soccer player, you play for Real Madrid and you are like better than anybody else, etc. So imagine now that this goes like becomes like a distribution of wealth suddenly, which I think is a healthy thing, and it becomes like global. Okay, so still you maintain some sort of like high standards, both for productivity and for talent, but also for the things that you give back to people, right? And they want them to have good life, and they want them to live nice, and they want them to, you know, feel that they are like they are treated well, right? And I think that creates some issue of identity here of the company, which becomes now global. It's not just local. It's just like a global identity of Google or of you know, I don't know, Microsoft or of Apple, and then you create this crowd of people that work for you, and it's preferably like top talent, right? And you create commitment on both sides to continue the ongoing relationship. So with respect now to the productivity issue, I think the issue is mainly how to create the relationship. It's an issue of relationship. It's an issue of creating this link of belonging, you know, and if somebody provides for you, you're going to do the work. And I know that, you know, my personal experience from trying to hire someone for like a group of programmers actually from Athens, and while I was at MIT, and they were just getting like half the salary from what a programmer costs here in Boston. So it was totally like a win-win situation. But as you said earlier, there are all these bureaucratic you know, like issues with who pays the tax and how this is going to be arranged, and which like complicates everything. But I think that it's going to be an issue of the past pretty soon, because it benefits both sides, and I don't see why these obstacles should remain for too long.
Well, it's a disproportionate benefit, and that's the main issue. It's not, no one's arguing that it's not benefiting, but it's an incredibly disproportionate benefit.
For whom?
Well, I mean, the consolidation of wealth has never been greater today. The three most wealthy companies on the planet are also the most, you know, if you start looking at where Google, Amazon, and Apple are sourcing a lot of their talent, it's not local.
Yes, but look at that. You know, the cost of life in Athens is like totally like it's half from Boston. So it's totally okay for somebody to get a salary that is still higher than, you know, what the average person receives, and still lower than Boston.
Then Athens will stay cheaper. I mean, you know, like, I mean, parts of the world will never get picked up that way.
Well, I believe that gradually this is going to cease to happen. You know, things will get balanced, but how you achieve this distribution of wealth is by just like doing exactly that, like going everywhere and just hiring people, not just in your village, but everywhere.
Yeah, but this one brings us another issue when it comes to nations and countries. You know, we're talking about GDP, which is basically a main thing when it comes to a wealthy country compared to others. And when we're talking about the gross national income, which is essentially GDP in addition to net income that's coming from outside the country to the inside. Usually, this is negligible when it comes to the calculation of like the economy kind of performance. But when it comes to having a lot of percentage of the net income coming from outside the country, this becomes an issue to deal with on a nation by nation, because like yeah, the country like in India, for example, or Singapore, they working from outside, and then just like most of the income is coming from outside.
Right.
So maybe a country like the US, maybe they don't like it, you know.
So on this note, I want us to move on to the next one, but let's just ask this question as a takeaway for this. Do you think with the fast adaptation and transformation that we observed over the past 6 months or so, that people are now very much used to working remote and centrality is no longer there? Do you think that that has an impact on the distribution of wealth and inequality? I know there was a workshop about that, but could that be something? Do you think it's actually going to change that, or you feel no? Still there are going to be local regulations and tax and global companies that can leverage or even misuse some of the local guidelines, or you think it will have an impact?
I mean, I think it's very clear that it's exacerbated the inequality of distribution of wealth. I mean, the only people that have been able to work in that environment are usually better well off. Like gig workers, I mean, like the distribution has actually become more extreme. It's fueled the divide.
Well, actually, also we can see that in education. For example, here's the distribution of wealth and how this impact on about what we have done learning in this way of working remotely. We can, for example, for Mexico, there are many people who don't have access for this kind of technology. So the inequality, we can see it of how they take these education resources. For example, this is a way of us to learn even more. For example, we're in Guadalajara and we are having contact, we're in touch with you, and you're in the US. But what about those students that they don't have access, that maybe they don't have a device, or they don't have even a connection? So here in Mexico, for example, it's been like a technique of some TV programs in which they have like some of the general subjects of classes like history, science, geography, math, in Spanish. But I think that inequality, it's even clearer, as if before we didn't see it as it is for real. Now we can see it. Now you can see those people that they have all devices, all access to this kind of classes. Like if you tell them send this this document by Google Classroom, but any other platform, it's like I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to access. I don't even have an internet connection. I just can send it by WhatsApp. So teachers have also worked a lot because they're receiving homework for a lot of places. So at least in Mexico, I can tell you that this inequality, we can see it a lot since 6 months ago.
That's a great point you mentioned, Jose. I think it's really key because we all heard, over the course of the past decades that having access to water, having access to electricity, they're key. There were key metrics of defining inequality. Now, we heard a little bit of that about connectivity and the internet, especially over the past decade. But now I think with what you're saying, that delta has grown so quickly and so high that we can position connectivity as important as having access to water, education, and electricity, because it creates such a big delta of differences. So I'm really glad that you brought it up. That's a very good feedback. So thanks for that. Any other comment? Sorry, go ahead. I think we have another.
It's okay. That I just wanted to say that I agree completely with what Jose said, but I also think that it goes beyond like equipment, and it also goes all the way to language, because what happens when a company is going global, and then even if you have all the skills, if you don't speak English, then you're not even considered. And also the fact that you will be like, now education and all of these skills become more and more important, because you're not competing only with like the status quo of your own country or your own area, but with everyone around the world. So if the company can, they will just find another one just like you, but that speaks English, or that speaks French, or that wants a little less money or whatever, like different variables. So then it can become like kind of like unfair competition, because we're not on a like an even playing field.
Very, very important topic, which I think we should take a note of that. It's not just classic connectivity from an infrastructure view, it's also the personalization and the tailoring in terms of what that connectivity brings based on the culture and norms of that location. I'll give you a real example. We work with a charity organization in Canada that delivers digital education to children in Peru. Now, we first worked with a company there's no connectivity there. So they put content on these tablets. This is very similar to what One Laptop Per Child initiative used to do. And they shipped them to remote locations in Peru. And the feedback that we got was very negative, was that thank you for the devices, thank you for the connectivity, but the content that you have here has nothing to do with our culture, right? So not even you should invest in giving me the infrastructure, you also have to have a cultural lens on how you deliver that. And I think going back to our conversation, I think these two should happen, and the cultural element is going to be very key to addressing that. So thanks for bringing that up. I want us to move forward. I'm going to skip a few things, and I'm going to go into the last question before we go into the open conversation and sharing some examples. I want to give you a reverse a case of what we have discussed so far. And this is a real scenario that happened to us here. We have a number of young parents working with us. And we said, okay, we'll support you. Go home, stay home, tell us what the company can do. And our employer said, I want to come to the office. I don't want to stay home. I want to come to the office, but can I bring my child with me? Right? So this is very different than the previous case study that we said, well, how are we going to help you at home? Now the employee is going to say, no, 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 I want to have centrality. I want to come to the office, but can you please facilitate a space in which I can essentially have a micro daycare in the organization, because either I don't have access to daycare or it's closed, or for whatever reason I can't use it. So if you're thinking about, again, you're talking about the companies of the future and the things that they may face, how are we going to handle this situation? Even let's say if the company is willing to put a child facility within a working space, liabilities, permits, zoning, insurance, lots of things that still need to be handled. So can we also discuss this and see what your thoughts are? Because I think this will allow us to really come up with an end-to-end framework, which is not just about shrink the central hub, move people to their home and augment them. It has to be a two-way, because people may say, I actually want to come to the office, but I don't want to see just cubicles. I want to have other support structures that were not available in the past, which is more aligned with my personal purposes and personal reasons. So we'd love to kind of hear the feedback that you may have on this as well.
And the other thing, if I may add, is we're talking about the parents here, but there's maybe other kind of demands and other kind of situations whereby maybe only looking at employees as parents it will maybe have a negative impact on maybe other employees. So we would like basically to know what's your thoughts about it, uh, and uh, and what other categories do you think that may emerge here?
Yeah. And we have a number of folks from MIT here that they have done some great work on adaptive zoning, and would be great to hear from them as well. Like, can the future an office kind of change its zoning and permits dynamically based on an algorithm rather than just having distinct permits on a shelf? Can an algorithm and data change the zoning based on what's happening in that space, whether you have a child there or not? So yeah, would love to get your feedback. Any comments there? Suleiman, you and I discussed some interesting things here. What are your thoughts on, you have done some good work on adaptive zoning. Where do you think that plays a role here?
Well, I think it's not maybe adaptive zoning per se, but we're thinking about the scale of the building when it comes to thinking that we usually occupy, even before the COVID, we usually occupy a building from a certain time of the day, like for example, 30 to 40%. And other than that, we're not occupying most of it. And when it comes to businesses, it's the same story. At night, we're not utilizing these spaces. And with some emergent kind of workspaces like co-working, we would see some um, agency of different types of activities that's happening. You give back to the city by opening a certain part of the building after hours for some public usage. So I think we can argue that we can come up with a kind of something similar to the tokenized system. You do this, and then I receive that. Uh, Most of the regulations, even nowadays, when it comes to if you want to have a special kind of planning regulation specific for your building, you can give back to the city, to the people in the city, and then you can negotiate um, a kind of like you can negotiate an additional kind of privileges. So I think such a system like this is really interesting, because if you are like if you're working and you know that your kid, when you are like there, you know that you can stay longer because it's not associated with a specific daycare that will finish sharp at 5. You can have more freedom to basically work after hours or something like that. But at the same time, it brings more challenges also when it comes to looking at the adaptivity in that aspect to the interest of like other people, when it comes to the interest of the parents. So what we can say maybe in this case is I would imagine that such a thing can exist, but with a certain threshold. So we can like say at certain time of the day to certain time, there's like this kind of flexibility, but the flexibility is also controlled by a certain kind of like regulations. Obviously, um, like how can we be effective? I mean, like efficiency and productivity can be the same as synonyms, and they can be different, totally different kind of like ideas based on the people. Um, so I'm not sure if anyone here would prefer like a certain kind of scenario. We actually discussed two scenarios, and then maybe why do you basically prefer that?
Here's what I suggest. We actually, as part of this, we want to show two examples on what we have seen, and then we want to open it up for conversations and want to make sure we keep everyone on time. So essentially the reasons we created these case studies is to get some input, and then we are going to generate these tables based on what we showed you today, that the company of future will require to really address certain attributes under the pillars that we discussed today collectively. Now, one of the key things that we are looking at, I mean, if you looked at in the past, was that you kind of, as when you were working, when you came with productivity, we looked at, okay, people can switch from a nature of a task to another. They kind of figure out, I'm going in a task mode. Now I'm discovering. Now I want to do socializing. Now I actually don't want to do any work. I actually want to go have fun. And in the past, when you came to the office, this is actually a research I did a few years ago. It was our organization, and I had to build a clustering algorithm that it connected clusters of groups based on their productivity and skill sets and recommend to me, well, who can work well with who in order to perform a particular task. And it worked very well. But the metrics that I used were very much work related. It was based on historical data on performance, productivity, how long you stay in the office. And this was my clustering algorithm in the past. And it worked to some extent, but it did not have a single context or signal from employees outside their working environment. So, but now, one of the things that I'm working on looks like this. We are actually measuring the performance of someone within the context of their community. How collaborative they are with their neighbors, right? The relationship of their work time versus their family time versus their exercising time. And then we collect all of that data using some type of a blockchain technology, because you're not comfortable to share that with your employee. You're comfortable to share that within a trusted community. And then we measure performance. So I didn't want to show you at the beginning because I wanted to really collect the data. But at the end, I wanted to show you at least a personal example that a project that we were working on like this, which only clustered people based on their work performance, is now moving towards a more community-based model. And we use that data to create some type of a gamification and tokenization between communities. That community one is actually more productive than community two, because they work better, they have fun, they spend time with family, and those metrics are actually being used to drive performance on a community basis. So I want to wrap up the formal part of our workshop by highlighting some of the things that we discussed. That in our view, the companies without offices, which is the title of our workshop, are companies that they have a purpose. They can communicate that purpose to their employees. They can rally people behind the objectives and the mission. They are inclusive. I think we talked about a lot of good things today. And they are the ones that they use data in a privacy preserving fashion, and they look at productivity on a way more holistic view, not just these are your tasks, if you finish them you're productive, yes or no. It's there's going to be more graying between their work and the life and the understanding of the companies. So I wanted to kind of wrap up the formal part with this. What we like to do, we got some input. We are going to compile them and we are going to share it with you as a takeaway from the workshop on what are the areas that the companies of future should look at under these six pillars that we talked about. But in the remainder of the time, we can just explore, talk, chat, and get some feedback from you. But I'm hoping that you found the conversation useful. I certainly enjoyed hearing a lot of your feedback. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we've got around 10 minutes or so. So I think we can open.
Did we lost Suleiman? Okay, anyone wants to share anything in no particular order? areas that you think that you're interested to collaborate, of course, we will stay in touch through the help of Maggie and the team. But anything you want to bring up, please do. This is like an open conversation.
I can add one more comment with respect to a dynamic algorithmic zoning and how, you know, company provides certain extra, you know, help to people so that they become more productive. I think the idea of algorithmic zoning is fantastic. The only thing that scares me in this idea is that uh, I would like a system that is very transparent. I think transparency is very important in every institution. And especially today, I mean, I think when we create mega institutions, the sense of the individual becomes weaker. And the only thing that saves the relationship between mega institutions and individuals is transparency. So if you abandon transparency, you feel weaker. So algorithmic zoning and all these complicated, highly sophisticated, you know, systems may be very efficient at the end of the day, but I think they create like a psychological, you know, problem in the sense that they are non-transparent. Nobody can understand how they work, and that's one of the problems that I see. But besides that, I think if a company provides more, you know, not just a salary, but it provides help on how you manage your family and how you you become like part of a whole group of people that live in a certain way and act in a certain way. I think that's not bad. It's very good, actually.
That's very important. Basically, if I want to map that to the framework that we discussed together, you're saying, well, data is going to be very helpful. We need data to help us to understand. But the way we interact with data, the way employees want to share data with employers is going to be very different. And there are research actually being done in Kent's group with other researchers around persuasive design on how do you create algorithmic transparency so the users or employees are more comfortable sharing data with you in a different way than in the past, which is, hey, I have a data lake about you and I can do whatever I want and I'm going to push things to you. So I think if that paradigm is understood a little bit better, I think none of us disagree that data is very valuable, but our relationship with data, the governance around the data, the ethics around the data, which I think regulation can only play a small role there. There is a trust culture that needs to be built, will play a key role in changing all the other five pillars that we talked about. Even down the road, that data can be used to um, facilitate the relationship of the employee and employer with the government when it comes to productivity. We currently do that, certainly in some regulations for our tax reasons, for our pensions. Why not do the same thing with the right usage of data for efficiency and productivity of an economy?
Yeah, but Hussein, when it comes to looking at a building that has at some point occupants of a certain number, 50 or 500, and then at other time 5,000, we see a very different demand, and that where we can flag, zoning and regulations to start with, considering that adaptive zoning, the way we're talking about it, the Media Lab with algorithmic zoning, is no more than adaptive reuse, but with a different time frame. The time frame is happening on a very short period, maybe on hourly rate, rather than when it comes to when you do adaptive reuse of a building, you get the approvals because you get like a different functionality, a different kind of usage inside the building. and that basically create a demand, a different demand in terms of like public transportation, in terms of, accessibility, etc. So, so I see like we need to rethink about, threshold and limitations when it comes to these kind of like new systems that can be introduced in these kind of spaces, considering that a regulation that, well, there's a different types of and hierarchy of regulations, from usage to demand, etc. So, any other thought?
Well, I would like to say also something very important. It has been said already, but yeah, the regulations, I think they're very important because, for example, if we're talking about medical insurance or any insurance that you will have, for example, if you go to a physical office, maybe if you have an accident during I mean, in the way that you're going to the office, it can be like a protection. But in this case, what if my office is I don't know, one special place of my house, and I don't know, I needed to go upstairs or downstairs, and I had an accident there. Would the insurance will cover as well that? I mean, it's kind of like for a joke, But well, if you see it as a lawyer, you're going to your office. So I know these regulations, it's been spoken, and I don't know how would this happen, or maybe like also like taxes. I remember like when Uber started here, and they have like this in Mexico, like why they were escaping about some taxes they're paying, and Uber that they're not. So I mean, it's like, yeah, when we have something new, we need to see all those maybe blank spaces that with this change they have. And that would be something that I've been discussing with some friends, because I think that this is a good way for the future. I think if you, for example, have a problem, maybe you had an accident with your I don't know, with your leg. So if you had an accident, you couldn't go to the work, but now you can do it at home. Now you can use the computer, dependent, of course, of the occupation that you're doing. But let's suppose that you just need a computer and a needed connection. So how this is gonna work? Will the office also will give you money for the how much you pay to the company that provides you the internet? I mean, all these things we need to consider for the future, I guess.
Jose, I think one of the things that is a bit of like a reminder of our regulations that is there with the labor condition report. It is required by the U.S. law that you have to advertise for the kind of the job for a certain number of days. But with COVID in the office, but with COVID, when you are actually working from home, the regulations at the moment is they ask you as a person, because you're working from home, to publish on your refrigerator the job advertisement that you're applying for, in order to basically to say that no one applied for this, and then you can actually have the labor condition report, which is in a way a reminder of a regulations that was there, but it's just I think it's become really funny to actually to look at how regulations and insurance and the like can maybe become really naive at some point, right?
Exactly. No, I think this was exactly the purpose of this workshop, which I think we are all feeling and seeing what's going to happen. It's great that it's such a complicated problem. That's why we are discussing it as part of this workshop. But it's going to be the dynamic and the competition of all of these new things that we haven't seen them before. And I think that makes it exciting. And we intentionally did not want to make the workshop prescriptive, so we make sure we hear all your opinions. We'll share some the deck with you, but would love to staying in touch with you, and I hope you found the workshop useful. So if anyone wants to add anything, please do. If not, both Suleiman and I want to thank you for joining us. I know it's later in the afternoon, so I think it was a great conversation, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the participation and being here. Just to answer the questions on the chat, yeah, Maggie and the organizers will be able to share the content and this recording when it's appropriate, when we're compiling everything together. But meanwhile, feel free to reach out to Hossein and me if you have any questions or if you need access to the materials that we provided today.
Yeah. Okay. With that, all the best and stay well and stay healthy. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you
Take
so
good
much.
care. Bye.
Thank you very much for this
Thank
great
you.
workshop.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.